guys, it's 5 p.m. sharp, which basically means we're all set for another edition of LBB's Open House. First off, thank you everyone for joining us. Welcome to yet another session. Essentially, Open House is a way for all of us, whether it's a team at LBB or multiple folks who are joining the call, to learn how to build brands better, right? And over the course of the past couple of weeks, for those who've been joining us, I'm sure you guys have seen that we've, got a stellar set of speakers, entrepreneurs, CXOs, and today we have, frankly, one of my favorite people in the VC startup tech consumer product space, who is Kanwal. Kanwal is a founder and a managing partner of Fireside Ventures. Over the course of his investing career, he's invested in cult brands like Paperbot, Epigamia, Boat headphones, Yoga Bar, Licious, Mama Earth, Vadam teas, etc. Chances are one of the products in your pantry, probably got a check from Kanwal and has grown thanks to his awesome advice. He's had a 19-year long career in investing, and prior to that, he was in leadership roles in consumer marketing at Hindustan Unilever and Intel India. Thank you so much, Kanwal, for joining us today.
Pleasure. Thank you for the introduction.
No, but it really is it's always a treat to talk to you. It's always a treat to be on panels with you, because you always have such interesting insights to share, whether it's about audiences or how products and how great companies are built. Before we get started, I thought what I would do is I just call out to the rules. So everyone, all 45 of you and many, many more who'll join over the course of the next couple of minutes, just please make sure your video is turned off. It gets a little distracting for me as well as the speakers to keep a track of conversations if multiple videos are bubbling up and down the screen. You guys are automatically on mute, so if you have any questions, feel free to ping them to me. I will take them up over the course of the conversation. So Kanwal, thanks a lot again. And now that I've introduced you, I thought the best question to start with is if you could just take us through your journey. You started at HUL, now you're a awesome investor. What's it been like for you, and what got you into investing?
Actually, it's been a series of accidents, if I may, and not trying to be frivolous. It kind of, took some calls at some different points of my life. I do see a few people I recognize on your list of participants, so some of them may have heard the story before. So I joined Levers from campus, did my MBA from FMS Delhi. And, it was one of those, day one jobs, and one didn't know enough about good, bad, ugly. So, that was like a first accident of joining Levers. Spent 10 years there, really enjoyed the experience. Obviously, Levers is the learning ground for pretty much anything to do with consumer brands, marketing, sales, distribution. And then got a very interesting offer to join Intel as head of marketing. And this was almost like an orthogonal kind of opportunity because, one is selling tea and one is selling chips. Mm-hmm. And I didn't really understand why they wanted someone like me, but very interesting perspective. Intel actually had a very large market share in a very, very small market.
Okay.
Their belief was that the only way to grow the business was to grow the overall PC market and not just sell more semiconductors. And they were really the players who could drive growth in a sense. So they wanted a consumer marketing person. They just launched Pentium MMX, which was a consumer PC kind of product. So it was really, taking a punt on a marketing guy from a classic FMCG background to come and help guide a thing. So that was a lot of fun because nobody had any clues of you were all figuring life out. And then I got very excited with the entrepreneurial stuff, which was going on around 2000. So this is really about 20 years ago. And in fact, thought of a few ideas, something that I could do by myself, didn't end up, finding anything exciting enough. And was getting a lot of interest from companies to come and join them as CEO or, as startups basically. And that was the time when venture capital had just about started in India. So I got an offer from a fund which was actually a global fund called Carlyle. So two of my colleagues from Intel had actually left Intel and started an Asia fund for Carlyle, and they wanted somebody with a consumer background to come and actually, help companies and so on and so forth. So I joined more to, support companies, but, became an if I can use a slightly tongue-in-cheek term, an accidental VC. Started investing in companies, enjoyed the experience, spent 4 years with Carlyle. And then I realized that Carlyle was too big a machine and too many, global directions rather than, having the liberty to do what you want. So that, and then, started a fund with two other partners called Helion. That was a 10-year journey. And that was probably the most interesting break point, where in 2015, I left Helion to just concentrate on consumer brands, with almost like, the first love of what I learned in the Lever setup. And I had no intention of raising a fund. I was very happy just setting up a small family office and writing small checks. So that's when all the names you mentioned actually happened. Mama, the Paperbot, all of them. But then I saw that there was something happening which was very fundamental, and I'm happy to talk about that as we go along.
Yeah.
It at least gave me the conviction that this whole concept of new age millennial brands, something was happening in the market which was quite seminal. I mean, almost structurally changing the way things were being done. I felt that that's a trend which India will see over the next, several decades. And that, then gave rise to this idea that it probably is better done in the context of a fund. And again, I can talk about that. And so that's how Fireside got born.
Got it.
That was the kind of journey till Fireside. So happy to talk about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So you've, obviously, every single brand that I just read out, I'm probably one of their like hyper, most engaged cohort users. It's a part of working at LBB. But I think what's fascinating about, each and every one of them is two things. One, their ability to transcend product lines. Whether you look at things like Mamaearth or even Epigamia, they've found a way to diversify, the product variants that they have, and even from a pricing perspective, they've made access, to high quality products. They've basically done a stellar job of it. I think, related to that, my question for you is, when you think of the market for consumer products in India, right? And I'm obviously going to get into COVID in just 5 minutes, but let's talk about pre-COVID, right? Happier times. When you think about the market for consumer products in India, I think the one trend or, whatever that I've seen is everyone usually ends up going after your metro users. That seems to be the lowest hanging fruit. What is your take on that trend? And have you seen, companies within your portfolio diversify, outside of it to say tier 2, tier 3 markets, etc.?
So I think there are a few questions here. So let me start by why so many new exciting brands and why now. Then maybe talk about, what the focus is and how it kind of moves forward. I think the first one is the most exciting one. What is happening is that we are seeing two very interesting trends converge. One is that there is a, significantly India, the young economy, large population of millennials or Gen Z or, whatever you call them. And they are, digitally native. They understand, what's happening in the world. Their whole world view is different.
Yes.
Therefore, their desires, their aspirations, what they want to consume, what are the stories behind what they consume is very different from, say, my generation and certainly from my parents and then beyond. Therefore, that leaves almost like a vacuum in the market for these exciting new ideas which don't exist. And on the other side, the infrastructure for building brands has gone dramatically into a more digital first kind of a narrative.
Correct.
Therefore, suddenly you have the opportunity to engage consumers through various, social media handles, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. You have influencers, celebrities. So you can actually build a brand with a very digital, almost personalized, kind of an approach. So that allows these young brands to start talking about those narratives.
Correct.
And then you also have the whole channels getting disrupted with digital first. So therefore, our belief was that these two trends, the digital infrastructure for distribution, for customer engagement, for building brand loyalty, and the demand by this new generation of millennials for new exciting products, is going to bring together this opportunity. And hundreds, if not thousands of new brands will get built. Now, if I take that argument forward, there are two or three implications. One is it is a millennial and a slightly more higher end of the market first. To answer your questions, the focus for this cohort of brands is still more urban, more metro, more, let's call it affluent, but not the, luxury kind of consumers. So whatever way you cut it, you're talking of 100 million type of a population, which is not a small number. And what we are really targeting with all our brands and what the market is seeing is more loyalty.
Yeah.
So that if I can have 1 million, 2 million, 5 million loyal base of consumers who are, buying on a regular basis, that gives me a pretty interesting, opportunity in terms of size of business and, even from a profitability, how can I price it? How can I charge for it? There is now a growing recognition that the next billion, as we call it in the rural or the small town sense, is probably catching up fast. So again, that is also a potentially a COVID outcome scenario. So I will, not go too deep into that. But we think that this familiarity and access to more brands, more conversation around brands and more comfort with the digital channels may actually allow brands. But then what will change is that the brands have to engineer and design their businesses for those consumers.
Absolutely.
You can't take Mama Earth as it is or Yoga Bar as it is and just push it downstream. And Paperbot has done some interesting work, which I can talk about,
absolutely,
of targeting these two different markets.
Absolutely. So before we get into that, right, I wanted to, kick off with, obviously given your experience with HUL, etc., and given that you've kind of got this bird's eye view of how brands are built, right? There are two key levers that any brand has. It's usually distribution and pricing, and then of course on top of that, you layer positioning, marketing, etc. And as I'm sure you've seen in your, over the course of your career, there's a big difference in between a product and a brand, right? So to break it down into specific questions, the first one is, in your opinion, what's the difference in between a product and a brand? What makes a brand, and therefore, investable by someone like you?
Sure. So, ultimately, a brand is a choice I am making, all else being equal. So product to me, is obviously the gold standard for anything I do. So I cannot build a brand with a bad product.
Absolutely.
But a good product is not a brand. I mean, so it's a interesting, flip of the coin or two sides of the coin. So therefore, what our belief, or at least what my learning has been all this while, is that you start with a great product. And therefore, that fundamental ability to understand, what is the consumer problem, what are the issues, what are you trying to solve for, that is a, time immemorial issue. So you have to answer for that first. And whether it was 20 years ago when I was a marketing manager in Levers, or whether it is today, if you don't get that understanding right, and if you don't create a product that suits that particular, need or gap in the market, then can keep spending money on just quote unquote communicating and advertising. So that to me is the starting point.
Got it.
However, for a consumer to buy a brand A or a brand B, then comes down to, like you called it, what do you stand for? What is the story behind the product? Why should I buy this? Why should I trust this brand? Different brands will have reasons which are very different why consumers. I mean, take simple categories like soap, for example, or paste, for example. I mean, everyone knows that the basic composition is the same few ingredients. Now you can have natural, you can have, the chemicals and all that. But beyond a point, you cannot build, Colgate cannot be 50-60% of the market because it has a superior product which is much better than anything else. Then it comes down to consumers, very strong connect with what it stands for. Let me take a couple of examples.
Absolutely.
Mama Earth is a very interesting case study, and it actually answers a lot of these questions. When company got started by Varun and Ghazal, they are a husband-wife team. Varun came from a very classic Levers and Coke background, marketing. They themselves had a baby. They found that there was nothing in the market which really was able to give them that confidence that, this is the right product for my child. So they were worried about, the chemical, they were worried about, the safety of that product. Is it really good enough for my child? And that prompted them to start a business. So, if it comes from the heart, we have seen a lot of success when, you have some personal almost connect with the business you're starting. Now, when they started, they were competing directly with Johnson & Johnson. And Johnson & Johnson is the, like whatever you call it, the daddy in the market, or in this case, the mommy in the market. And they really, had to think of saying, I cannot beat Johnson & Johnson on product, because there is no way that, Johnson & Johnson cannot do a better product than I can. And that's true for pretty much across all startups. We found that, because they were catering to a very large market, there were certain formulation and certain kind of, base requirements that they had, which was what the millennial parents were concerned about. Some chemicals and some issues. So they actually started with that thing, saying, we will make products which are made safe. So got a European agency, they got a certification called Made Safe, so the whole process, ingredients. So the story became, this is safe for your child. And to amplify it with, obviously, the social media and with mom bloggers, and then they got Shilpa Shetty and all that. So I think in a way, that's a great example of creating a strong trust with your audience, that this is for me, and I am really the, core target that they are trying to address this to. So that kind of works across, and we can talk about boat, we can talk about yoga bar, all of them have this common thread.
I think what's fascinating about what you just said is there's so much of nuance that even goes into identifying what is your differentiator, right? And I think a lot of brands have tried different nuances. Some have stuck, some haven't. In fact, I think as a second example, I'd love to get into epigamia, right? Where I mean, if you think about it, and this is just my take as a consumer, there's yogurt, and then there's what they did by you can an amateur can simplify it and say that they just added a Greek in front of the yogurt, and that's what made the difference, or it's a name or whatever else. But I think even such a if we could maybe talk about them, because again, fascinating brand, a really interesting way in which they've been able to tell their story, that too in a category like yogurt, which no one really cared about until they came along.
Absolutely. So again, this is a very, very interesting case study, because this one, like you said, you are targeting, you're trying to sell, as they say, ice to an Eskimo. Yeah. Because yogurt is such a common, home consumption product. How do you create a, differentiated brand and a highly priced product? I mean, if you do a like-to-like comparison of a kilo of, dahi you make at home and epigamia, maybe 3x or 4x, I'm not sure. So what they did was 2-3 things. One is, once again, they said, let us focus on getting a product which is delicious. So therefore, the whole focus was on, these various, additives and creating the right formulations and the product. And they had a great co-founder who's a ex-Taj hotel chef, and I think he's done a fantastic job. So the product is gold star. Second is that they said that this one, we have to position it as something which is healthy for you. So the word Greek is really to qualify a particular, because this is what you call hung curd, right? Therefore, it is automatically higher on protein, higher on all the nutrients and so on and so forth. So you actually could position it as a healthier snack.
Got it.
So you are still not saying I am so healthy that I am tasteless. My argument with Rohan has always been, too much of sugar, and, I don't like to eat your product because it's too. So he's now launched a sugar-free variant. So therefore,
being an investor, you can get your portfolio company to do whatever you need them to.
Doesn't work like that. I mean, talk to Neeraj at Paperbot and say, cut sugar, and he'll throw me out of the room. So, they have to do what is right for the consumer, not for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So first was, you create a product which is delicious. You add in a benefit which is, desirable, which is all about, it's healthier for you. You bring in a usage occasion in the case of epigamia, which is a snacking usage. See, curd at home or curd at home is used really as an accompaniment to food.
Correct.
But eats yogurt as a snack. So suddenly you created that, and they got a beautiful line, Choti Si Bhook. Essentially, if you're hungry, instead of eating chips and all of that stuff, here is a nice way for you to, satisfy that hunger. And they, of course, made it a very modern, very exciting brand. Of course, then they got Deepika Padukone and all of that. So that happened much later. So you almost created a very desirable new category. Same with yoga bar. Again, there was no concept of energy bars. So I feel that some of these brands are taking that additional, step forward of saying, listen, let me take what may be even common in today's, context of consumption, ID. Everybody can make idli dosa batter at home. If I can give you a ready-made batter, take out the chore, but also give you the comfort that this is, safe, natural, blah, blah, blah. So there are enough of those cases where you are not necessarily changing the habit dramatically, but you are able to give it in a very modern, very exciting format. And that then, obviously makes it more interesting.
Asa, you have a question?
Yeah, if I could just jump in, sir. This has been really interesting, and I wanted to ask you this. With the portfolio of brands that you've been working with, right, whether it's Epigamia or Mama Earth, so they've reached this place where they're emerging brands. What do you think will be their next flip to become an established brand? Like, what do you think will it take?
Sure. So I think that's a complex question. And there are many different manifestations of that. One is, obviously, most of the brands we work with, and I guess by design, are brands which are digital first.
Right.
So initially, we used to have this, quote unquote, hypothesis that you can build 30, 40, 50 crores digitally. A boat is a 700 crore brand, born and built on the internet. So that, therefore the opportunity to build large brands digitally is becoming itself an interesting. Mama Earth is again over 100 crores. So, there are enough examples now. Second is the, how large is the story? And that's where, to Suchita's point, at what stage do you take the brand offline into the regular distribution? What is your distribution strategy, and how to balance the two? How do you use still digital channels of engaging the consumer, and the distribution points become multi-different dimensions? So I think from what will make a brand to the next level, obviously, is you are continuing to build love and brand loyalty with your core customers, but you have to keep expanding the base. What a lot of brands are now trying to do, and I think Suchita briefly referred to that in the beginning, they are actually questioning some very, I would call, basic learnings for people like us who grew up in a Hindustan Lever kind of a setup. Is what is the stretchability of a brand? So, I can tell you, I was in the tea marketing business, and, one brand like Taza, several hundred crores, maybe 1,000 crores. So, you are also very, very careful about every little baby step you take. Mama Earth has 150 different products, and it goes from mosquito repellents to diaper rash creams to even under the same brand, you have face masks for the mother. So you have actually, and what happens is that because you are using digital channels, your ability to rapid prototype and, again, a term we use called rapid fail and learn and move on, much easier. So in levers, you spend 2 years building the whole story of the brand, the product, the testing, the consumers, the advertising. You have no risk of failure. You cannot take a risk of failure. So you have to make it work first time in the go. While here, we have, boat launches, I think, new SKUs every month.
Correct.
And obviously not everything works. But you continuously keep churning your portfolio, you find the winners, you put more money behind it. So the digital channels have allowed more experimentation. What is our consumer insights? We don't do research. I mean, again, I'm not saying good or bad, I'm just telling you reality. You do Amazon review mining. So both found that a lot of consumers 4 years ago were complaining about the cables which are used for phone chargers, especially Apple phone cables, were fraying very easily. They're not built for Indian rugged use. So they launched a range of cables called indestructible cables. And these had Kevlar coating on them. Now you can imagine a cable which you normally roll up, put in your bag and you move on. This thing doesn't fold. I mean, it's actually, it's a stiff wire, but it solved the purpose because it was indestructible. So I think a lot of this learning, and Asta, I'm going a little bit wider on your question.
Yeah, no, it's really fascinating.
Yeah. But, if you start putting all this together, then you start seeing that the blueprint of what you can do with a brand can be much larger.
Yeah, absolutely. Before I get into, my other question, which is going to be distribution, right? Because it's interesting. I read this quote online, which was first time founders focus on product, second time founders focus on distribution. And distribution is essentially, all of us love to build great things, but none of us really think through what are your points of consumption, right? And also how do brand journeys differ basis your points of consumption. So if we could maybe deep dive into that, so once a founders establish their job to be done for their product, right? And they've said that, okay, this product is fulfilling the job of snacking, like in the case of Epigamia. What, in your opinion, must be steps 2, 3, 4, 5 when it comes to then isolating what are your channels of distribution? Because, with a lot of young brands, as I'm sure you've seen, their first round is friends and family, right? So tapping into every single modern retailer needn't necessarily be an option, and Amazon needn't always be, every brand's preference in terms of distribution. So could we deep dive into, what you've seen different brands do and what, in your opinion, makes for a great distribution strategy?
Sure. So it's obviously contextual and depends on sector, depends on the space you are in, and depends on, several factors. And I can take a few examples. I think the most important one is that, and again, I'm not talking rocket science, but people forget that sometimes, is that you have to get your basic foundations of what your brand is all about right. So therefore, initially, and we have this very well-known term, and I think all marketing textbooks will have this term called the J curve. I think J curve is real, and it is something that everybody needs to fully be aware of. So getting my product market fit, getting consumer response to my product, understanding what kind of metrics are driving consumer behavior. I think some of these things there is no shortcut for. So before even I go into distribution, I think that's the fundamental foundation of building up any business, I think, but certainly in the brand business. Because this is not a network business, this is not Google, this is not Facebook where virality will kick it off. These are nuts and bolts kind of requirements. Now, if you have a company, if you have a brand, for example, which needs to be, let's say, tested in an offline environment, I would say be very, very careful, choose one market, go to a certain set of customers. Honestly, if you ask me, modern trade becomes the tougher one to get into. So a lot of our companies, when they start, they actually work with what we call the standalone supermarket type of players.
Got it.
So in a daily context, your modern bazaars and your marchés and so on and so forth. I think they also, we have found, are far more accessible, far more amenable to younger brands. They in some ways empathize with the journey these brands are taking. So you actually have to first do your learning on the floor of the shop if you are going in the real world distribution. Or if you are going online, then again, you have to choose where your battles are. Some companies have started first with the marketplaces, and interestingly, and contrary to, I don't know if there was a concern there, but I find that all these large marketplace players, whether it's Amazon, whether it's BigBasket, whether it's Flipkart, are actually very accessible to startups. Now, the problem is that they don't have human faces to interact with, because that is practically not possible. And a lot of frustration builds around that. And I know some of the people on this panel, on this audience, I know personally, and I know the struggles they have with Amazon. But at least they have programs which can allow you to, Launchpad is one example, and so on and so forth. BigBasket, in fact, I would go even one step further, and just to call out just their commitment. We created a program with BigBasket called BB Accelerate. This is a program only for startups. That has been, driven by Hari himself, and he has got a single point of contact within BigBasket. So I would say that the learning and the experience, especially on either your own website where you do basic experimentation, So you still have to advertise, you still have to get some customers. But it's not only about revenue, it's about understanding the metrics. And if it's an Amazon, then you have to figure out what kind of demand you're seeing, what kind of customer ratings you're starting to. If it's your own website, obviously there's a lot more data that you can get.
Correct.
And the ratios around CACs and ROAS and all of that stuff.
Correct.
So to me, that is the more important decision. If you're raising a small amount of money and you want to just start, learning the thing, is don't try to buy sales by spreading yourself thin. Physical distribution, one of the big mistakes several companies, including some in our portfolio, have made is go too wide too soon.
Got it.
It's very seductive to go and place it in 1,000 stores, but what happens is there is little offtake, the product gets old, shopkeeper is not paying you the money back, your inventory is getting stuck, and consumer is buying product which is 3 months old. So it's a very bad, vicious cycle.
I think that's definitely one point. I think the second mistake that, we've seen a lot of young brands make is not think through their supply chain, right? Because, products have shelf lives. So if you haven't thought through that, the last thing that you want is your stock expiring, and that's just like lots and lots of inventory loss, right? So supply chain, to the point that you made as well, is another big point that folks don't think enough about.
Absolutely. So interestingly, our worldview is that going digital first is a good strategy. Now, every company, boat, like I said, till 1.5 years back had no physical distribution. It was 100% online, and it's a large, 500-600 crore business at that point of time. Then they went offline, and the interesting learning there was that the demand for offline actually came because they built a great online brand.
That's awesome.
So actually distributors started talking to them. Yoga Bar, when they started going to new markets, they actually found easier acceptance by the retailers because they said, we have heard of this brand. We know that Yoga Bar is an interesting brand. So sometimes, this whole what A versus B actually starts fitting. And now what's going to happen, and again, I think a new world order which will emerge is there is no such thing to me as online versus offline. I think everything is going to be all mixed up. So whether it's Amazon doing Prime, Amazon doing Fresh, whether it's, Big Basket setting up almost kiosk-like businesses at the apartments, and whether Reliance Jio powering the physical retailer to offer digital footprints, it's going to be a very, very interesting, I think a great time to build brands. So the 97 people on your list today. If they're all entrepreneurs, then more power to them.
Yes, guys, build brands and retail them all through LBB. Subtle plug. I actually wanted to bring up another point. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I haven't come across a single large direct-to-consumer brand in India, right? It's a bit of a fad in the US with brands like Glossier or Away and the likes. But I don't know if I don't know if there are any examples. Have you seen direct-to-consumer play out at all over here?
It's still early days. I think the problem in India, if you ask me, is also infrastructure around logistics, warehousing, payment systems. So the cost of doing business is quite expensive if you're trying to do it only on your own website. Second is because the consumers are still getting used to buying, digitally. Platforms like Amazon and Flipkart and Big Basket and Nykaa give you a very easy starting point. But having said that, obviously, all brands do have, so whether it's Mamaearth or Yoga Bar, we all have a Kapiva, all of them have their own D2C things. In terms of size, it's still not very large. I think the second thing that happens is in India, the average ticket price for a product, especially in the, more FMCG and the daily use space, is significantly lesser than, say, in markets like US and Europe.
Absolutely.
So all your costs then add up. So if I am an Amazon and I have, a Prime where I have got customers who are buying on a regular basis, my ability to optimize other costs and even absorb a lot of the losses that I am incurring. So I think brands do understand that D2C is important for, creating a direct customer connect and creating obviously the both the financial, obviously a better model, but also more data, more understanding, more metrics, and someday a stronger brand, because ultimately on a marketplace you are competing with hundreds of other players, and the ups and downs will happen. But
Yeah.
I would say that if you are a digital first brand, having a hybrid strategy between your own and the marketplaces is probably the right way to think about it.
Got it. And of course, the other big component, like you said, is price, right? Unfortunately, there is a significant amount of elasticity where you can't go above X, and maybe I got this number wrong, but someone had mentioned that if you're in the beverages space, your drinks need to be sub 100 rupees for them to see traction. So everyone's focus becomes about bringing your the price of your beverage under $100. I don't know if that applied to companies like Paperbot and the likes. But do you see any best practices around pricing? Are there any thumb rules that folks should be mindful of?
Sure. So I think price is obviously a critical, and I would say price and value. I think that's a combination. It also, so 100 is to me way out of line. I don't think you can build a large beverage business with a 100 rupee price point. So I mean, we are talking 10s and 20 rupee kind of numbers.
Yeah, got it.
So I think the let's step back. What are you trying to build? And therefore, to me, if you can build a good, solid 75, 100 crore brand, which is premium, which is priced above market and has a strong consumer base, a lot of loyalty, I mean, that's a very fair outcome. So it depends on, what your starting point in and what you're trying to achieve. If you're saying like, I have to build a 1,000 crore brand in the Indian context, then of course, you have to be very mindful of what price points. So let's continue the beverage example. Paperbot realized that the market for obviously functional beverage, juices, the non-carbonated is a large market. But again, it is very sharply divided between a certain price point. So I would say the 20 rupee and below is the big market. However, their whole story around the brand and exotic Indian, forgotten whatever flavors, a fantastic job on the brand.
Yeah.
Paperbot has been built as a very strong, lot of loyalty. But to think of Paperbot itself becoming a 5,000 crore brand with the current mix is going to be tough. So what they did as a very conscious step, I think about a year and a half back, they launched a sub variant called Paperbot Swing, which was a 10 rupee product.
Okay.
And they engineered their entire business model to allow for that to become a sustainable, self-standing kind of a business. So, how you produce, how you distribute, everything has to be reimagined.
Got it.
That. So now their strategy is that the loyal consumers who are looking for that 30, 35 rupee price point, they are in fact introducing even more exotic ideas and variants there. So that consumer feels that, but that, whether it's 100 or 200 and 300 crores, it's a very strong, loyal consumer which will grow at its own pace.
Got it.
But can I add another 500 crores, 1,000 crores of revenue at the next level, at the next billion or the rural consumers you talked about? So I think strategy, it cannot be one shoe fit all in any case.
Got it.
You can plan it in a little bit more interesting way. Should it be separate brands? Should it be sub-brand? All those things have to be kind of thought about, and it's all really contextual, so difficult to analyze. But price is important.
Yeah, so related to that, I guess the question I was asking was price is a great way to also drive discoverability, right? If you are launching, say, a tea brand, and that there are 20 other incumbents and then 20 other insurgents that are on the shelf, to create your first level of sampling or to create your first level of discovery, price plays a critical lever, right? Are there, if not pricing, what else can a brand use? Especially when especially when you're definitely not the cheapest on the shelf. What are the different levers that one could use? People have done sachets in the past. Obviously, folks like Wingreen's and Epigamia have done a stellar job of just sampling, right? And figuring out and using that as a lever to drive at least your initial, first 100, first 1,000 consumers. What are the tactics that you've seen some of the more interesting brands use?
I think sampling is obviously the obvious one. Now, what is the right type of sampling, right amount of sampling, how many times you need to sample, what is the right SKU size? Those again become interesting contextual things. But I don't think it's as much price as sampling, because, I can say I have a 100 rupee product, which I will give it to you for 50 rupees. The risk there is that consumer says, okay, whenever it's available for 50, I'll buy, but, I don't think it's worth 100 rupees. So in a way, you are almost, creating a little bit of disincentive to even establish my price. So in some cases, yes, price works as a great strategy, and you can get people to try it. But I would say that the larger objective is obviously sampling.
Got
And
it.
very often what we have done is even to the extent of saying we will tag it with a complementary product and can create a like for example now a lot of these digital marketplaces allow you to sample with some predefined consumer criteria.
Correct.
So if I have a Tasty Tales, which is a cooking paste, anybody who's buying, let's say, a certain type of products, I can put a product into that. So I would say price is a very strategic decision, and therefore that has to be tackled at a far more serious strategic level. But once you feel that this is my price, getting initial trials by 15% off, 20% off, that is a common tactic.
Got it.
But I would not use that as a way to establish the brand, because beyond a point, then you become, that's been one of the issues with several product versus brand controversies. I'll give you an example. There are many brands specifically on, say, a site like Myntra, which have built even reasonable sized businesses, but they are known to be discount brands.
Got it.
People have got so used to 50% off that they won't buy if you are not offering a discount. So then you are really diluting your brand.
Yeah. Got it. So actually, apparel is a great segment that I'd love to jump in on because super complicated segment, right? Like you said, unfortunately, marketplaces have spoiled consumers. You will very rarely see discounts on, on things like Epigamia and Paperbot and the likes, but apparel seems to be that one category that's perennially on a discount, right? For folks on this call who may be thinking of building an apparel brand, what's your take on that industry? We've experimented on shop on LBB as well, and just keeps coming back to the same thing, which is value is important, but like the D word, right? Discount just is this like banner in the background somewhere or the other. So how does one corroborate specifically for industries like apparel, which unfortunately are just plagued by more incentivized selling?
Sorry, Suchita, I think I froze for 5 minutes.
Yeah, no worries. Did you get my question?
No.
Okay, so my question was, what would your advice be, say to folks who are launching within apparel as a segment? Because that segment, unfortunately, has perennially been, plagued by discounting, whether it's on marketplaces or even, now retailers and malls and everyone just wanting to be on sale all the time. How does one disrupt that?
See, again, I think this is probably one category where you will have to follow the market norms to some extent. So, whether if everybody is 50%, can you get away with 20? I think those are the possible scenarios to think through. But again, I would go back to the same point again, that your brand has to be strong enough or positioned well enough consumers to actually have a strong desire to buy it. So why should I pay? I mean, forget 2,000, 3,000, 5,000. Why should I even pay that price if I'm not convinced that this is for me? So I think, let me take one example of a company we have recently invested in, but I have known Ayushi for a while now, which is Fable Street. And Fable Street, found a niche in the market which was for well-fitting, women's workwear fashion.
Got it.
So this was not about, something which was more in the, more, going out or more aesthetic. This was really about saying, what is smart, functional, fits you well, and, is obviously stylish, but not, in a way, it's less of fashion, more of form. And that, they have been able to establish in terms of price points, in terms of and this is a D2C brand. So you asked that question earlier. In fact, they have just launched on Myntra and other channels. So it is possible to do that. I think it is going to be a one step at a time journey.
Got it.
We have a company called Pipabella. Pipabella is again a D2C brand doing quite well, very loyal audience. They do some very fun stuff. Launched their brand on Amazon and Myntra, and they withdrew it because they just didn't want to compete with this 50% off and 70% off kind of a mindset. So it's also the environment that you are in.
Got it.
in a physical, in a mall, you also have, there are some malls which have got branded as discount malls and some brands are slightly more. So again, you choose where you want to be seen, what is the environment. I think some of those questions are there. And I go back to my original point that eventually what you're trying to build is certainly going to be, important before you start getting into these kind of discussions. Because to me, just mindless discounting and, creating, then you're really selling a cheap product. I mean, and maybe I'm being controversial and some people on this talk may not like it. So I'll give you another example of a far more, discounted category is the whole consumer electronics and smartphone accessories. And boat is a great example there. There, what we found is that, there is something called MRP, which is irrelevant because nobody buys on MRP. Then something called, some kind of a discounted price. And then on top of that, you have another discount and all that stuff. So the whole category works with, you put anything on top. So 5,000 rupees for a headphone, everybody knows it's not 5,000. And you will then say, okay, 2,500, now 1,500.
Yeah.
That has happened. So Boat actually did a very smart thing. They played the same game. They actually played it with a far lesser, this gap. So they never became a 70% off brand. They became a 30% off brand.
Got it.
And in positioning terms, they fall between the entry level, the low end, very price category and the JBL, the Sonys, the Philips of the world. So they found a niche where people were saying, listen, I am willing to pay 50% or even 100% more for a headphone because it gives me great value. So if the average headphone is, 400-500 rupees, they sell at 1,000. But the comparison is with a larger brand which sells it for 2,000 or 3,000 rupees.
Got it.
This is great value.
Got it.
Boat never went down the path of being the cheapest in the market, but they also had to follow the strategy. So if you go online and you check on Amazon for Boat headphones, you will find that they're also discounted. But I'm pretty sure to say that they will be discounted less. And then the second thing happened. Their products started getting tens of, 20s of thousands of ratings as good products.
Got it.
So therefore, that gives you the ability to charge an extra 20% premium, extra 30, or discount by 10% less, 20% less. I think that's the balance you have to figure out.
That is a fantastic example where, of even if you have to play the game, play it by your own or create rules within a construct, right? I think that's really a fantastic example. Asa, do you have a question?
Yeah, I actually thought we'll come into COVID sooner, but we were discussing such fascinating stuff that I didn't get to it. But two questions into one. Did COVID give you sleepless nights? And why? And second, what are the alarm bells that you sort of look at when you're investing? So, I mean, there's so much that you can learn from successes, but failures as well, right? Like they teach you so much. So could you take us through a few of those examples?
So actually, and without being frivolous, I have never slept better. Work from home suits me. So I have actually found that, overall, my travel had become excessive and I was, generally on the road and, so the whole stress level of not necessarily just the mental stress, but the physical stress had become too much. So, so to sleepless nights, certainly it's been a boon for me, personal. But yes, obviously we have 20 companies in our portfolio and, all of them are like your own children. So you have to be careful. Fortunately, what happened is that two things happened. One is that we just philosophically and in the space we are in, we are working with consumer brands and we are working with, high quality entrepreneurs with the intent of always having a eye on profitability. So that's the point that Suchita was also asking. You have to be very clear about your unit economics and what you're trying to build. So in a way, we were able to manage that there was no casualties and we didn't have, literally companies falling off the cliff because they ran out of cash. And today, 70% of our companies still are not selling or selling almost close to zero. So not as if, we have had a fantastic, outcome of that. But for everyone, the first port of call was to, hunker down, be very, very clear about CEO level downwards, everybody taking salary cuts, talking to employees, everything. To me, that was, a great show of solidarity and show of, maturity and leadership by our companies. So that was one, I would say, dimension. Second is I love the resilience of entrepreneurs. And I will not quote her and embarrass her, but one of the entrepreneurs told me, Kamal, 4 years ago, I started with nothing. I took it up to this level. This crisis has hit me. I will start again. And I will rebuild it. And I'm saying, to me, that was the quote of the COVID so far.
Yeah.
So I think to give you at least the overall feel of it, I think we have different businesses and different sectors, and we believe that some of them will come out stronger. So companies which are in health and wellness, Kapiva, Yoga Bar, Vadam, Tasty Tales, Ready to Cook, some of these spaces are probably going to come out even stronger. Overall, e-commerce is going to be even more important, or some form of digital engagement with the consumer, because even now retailers are going with digital, and now with Jio and WhatsApp and all that. So we directionally, we may actually see, next 6 months, 12 months are going to be rough. But we'll see actually some interesting businesses. And any crisis you see in history has always given birth to some very interesting new businesses, because you are able to almost, re-engineer, redesign yourself. That is one part of it. We also believe that there are companies which will be slow to take off. So fashion certainly is one of them. And, people know, all of you guys, when you will start buying fashion again, we need you to start soon. But it will be slow. And therefore, how do you plan for your overall business model? And what do you do in that time do you need to re-engineer your business? Do you need to create new products? And of course, you can do short-term things. So Fable Street, I gave you an example. They had their own workers, they had all the infrastructure and nothing to do. So they started making masks. Started making masks which were interesting masks, because they had great fabric for fashionable clothes. So now their masks are all kinds of lovely fabric, lovely clothes, and they're actually selling it, and now they are on Amazon. This may not be a long-term business strategy, but I'm saying that's the whole jugaad mindset of entrepreneurs which all of us love, right? So that is the second piece, that how do you come out of it, and how do you redesign your business? And I would be honest, some businesses which are looking very tough, I would be very candid and say better to just give it a pause if required, almost stop doing what you're doing. Come back in 6 months, 12 months, because the entrepreneurs have the ability to always restart life one more time. And I would not waste my, effort, focus, and mental energy in doing something which is so against the tide. Restaurants and hospitality, they will come real time. Now you can clearly, make a restaurant into a cloud kitchen, and that's a great idea. I think that will continue to be an interesting one. But a lot of people have asked us this, and there are companies which we know are going to struggle a little bit. And, at least you have to be honest about your feedback.
I think the second question was related to failures, right? And it's interesting that we guys are talking about failures in the thick of all of this, because like you said, unfortunately, a lot of entrepreneurs will have to, put their shoes up and rethink the constructs of their business. Could you give us examples of, things that you may have done in the past, companies within your portfolio, even outside of your portfolio, who have learned from their failures, right? Or even throw light to the kind of failures that sometimes companies, wash their eyes, wash their hands off, or, shut their eyes to, which would be of interest to everyone on this call.
So, failures, there are plenty. So I don't know how appropriate it is for me to name companies as failures. Let me take a slightly different slant to this and talk about two companies. Both of them I have already spoken of, where their original attempt at business actually didn't work out.
Got it.
So one was obviously Epigamia, where Rohan started with an ice cream brand called
Which is a fascinating story.
So again, since you know the story, I won't go too deep into it.
No, tell everyone, all the 99 people here. In fact, Rohan's going to be on our next session.
Okay. Yeah. So, so I think just to make sure all the 100 people join you next time, I will not go too deep into it. But I think the fact that you launched a business, so let me tell you the pivots he made, and I think that may be an interesting way to think about it. He started out with a cold stone model. where he came from the US. And again, his story is fascinating. So there are so many things you can talk about. But let's say one young boy coming first time in India, born and brought up in the US, wants to start a company in India and decides to launch a retail store business, selling ice cream on that Cold Stone model. Pivoted from there into a FMCG product, which was cold chain dependent. So it to be frozen, and a great product. I think all of us loved it.
Yeah.
And then we realized that, this whole Greek yogurt and the epigamia story happened and all that. So you can see the pivots. Interestingly, again, it wasn't as if he had, huge money in the bank, or he, because he raised all his money after epigamia started, picking up. So he still had angels, and all of us were, small check writers. That is one interesting example where I think the learning was that you learn, like I said earlier, you learn fast, you fail fast, and you move on. And that move on could unfortunately end up being that you may have to stop what you're doing and come back some other time again, or you have the ability to pivot yourself and do something in the same business. Probably the other story which is as interesting is Paperbot. Again, started with an energy drink called Zynga, and tried many different things. There was again a lot of logical reason why it was a good idea. And it just didn't work. And again, I won't go. You should call Neeraj on your program also. So I think the one interesting learning for me was that willingness to accept that things are not working. And how quickly do you pivot yourself and you move on? And that's really the big learning. As an investor, I have seen so many companies where I've invested which have not made it. And I would say partly me to blame, partly the entrepreneurs, because we kept saying, let's try a little more, let's try a little more. So, both the discipline as an investor to say, okay, this is not working, let's move on. Obviously, sometimes you get so emotionally attached to it that you can't, stop yourself. So I have been guilty of that quite often. And I think entrepreneurs are obviously born optimists. So I would say that the big learning is that, you have to call a spade for yourself, not for somebody else, very early on, and be willing to look at, what are the other options. And I think this COVID time will probably push a lot of entrepreneurs into that decision point sooner rather than later. I would say it's a tough call, but better to take it as amputation rather than a slow, bleed to death kind of a thing. And
absolutely,
that's just unfortunately the reality.
Absolutely. So, we're already almost at 6. I'm going to ask you 2 quick questions, right? One is sticking to the theme of COVID because, obviously everyone is kind of confused, right? No one can really predict the future. People are talking about a second wave happening because consumers have lost the plot in China and the US. They're all up and about like, they were on a 2-month vacation up until now. With all of this unpredictability, is there anything that you think is predictable in terms of, how consumers will come out of COVID? Are there any long-term behavioral changes that you're sensing within these users? Are there short-term impacts that you're 100% sure of, which everyone should just brace for, especially folks on this call who are running their own companies?
So I think slightly longer term, we have a better, ability to think through what are the possibilities. Now, whether it will take 3 months or 6 months or 12 months, I would say we are telling our company, that's the best way I can answer this.
Sure.
To plan for a 12-month of uncertainty.
Got it.
Not a 2 month, 3 months, business may come back to 50% to 75%. So therefore, your cost structuring, your things. So also, thinking about too many large expansion plans, put them on hold, physical distribution, be more careful, So in fact, hunker back, go back to the core. Even in product lineups, go back to your core products, which are the most logical ones. So are all the, I would say, just the tactical points that we keep discussing, and everything keeps getting relooked at, revised, and so on and so forth. But, build your business model in such a way that you have the flexibility to go up and down on cost.
Yeah.
And, it may be, easier said than done, but there is no choice. I mean this is, you cannot build a business if you don't have money in the bank, and funding will be constrained. investors will be, difficult to convince to put more money. So it's very, very uncertain. I think what will certainly emerge, and nobody argues with the fact that, 12 months or some point in time, things will come back to some level of normalcy. The new normal, like I said, will be more digitally connected. I think that's one thing that we are very convinced about. So whether it's e-commerce, whether it's people more comfortable with digital, some form of commerce, whether it's the local retailer putting up his catalog on WhatsApp or all the hybrid models that might exist. Second thing is that the value for brands may actually go even higher. Consumers will worry about simple things like safety, hygiene, trust. So actually, there may be a trigger from unorganized, like simple example, Licious. This is a meat home delivered business.
Correct.
Doing really well. But, their proposition was health, safety, hygiene, convenience. Now, imagine with this kind of scenario, people who love their, non-veg food, or their meat and their seafood, going and buying from a local butchery. Not going to happen, or it will certainly come down. So Licious may actually see a huge spurt in business. But then, people are also going to be very sensitive about price because, you can't keep buying expensive. So you have to, again, remodel your business to say, okay, if I'm going to get, another 2x, 3x, 4x new consumers, how does my business design look like? How can I appropriate? So I think the trends for wellness, the trend for immunity, the trend for safety and hygiene certainly be top of mind for consumers, and therefore any business which can, kind of be either in that space or design themselves in that space have a stronger opportunity. This whole experience at home. So the stay at home, work at home business, there's a term that I've heard which I really like called nesting. Anything that you do in your home environment, how do you then leverage that? Can boat, for example, become the best solution for a work at home model? Very well priced, but really, these don't crackle, their battery life is longer, you can use it for your content watching on Netflix and Prime, but also you can use it for work at home. So those are the kind of things. Like I mentioned, we have a company called Tasty Tales. They're a ready-to-cook business. Now suddenly, the big highlight of every home today is you are cooking something which is the moment of the day. So somebody who can help you create exotic dishes without having to worry about recipe books and ingredient chopping and grinding and all that. That's an interesting, ready to cook, everybody is saying will be an interesting new space. So I think the shape of consumption may come out slightly differently and people will consume differently, and certainly there will be a flight to value, as they call it. So we will see a lot more price sensitivity, but not necessarily flight to the cheapest. I think flight to value more than that.
Got it. No, it's interesting you bring that up because, look at what happened to Blue Apron stock, right? It became a bit of a Twitter meme for a couple of weeks, but look at what happened to Blue Apron stock. Suddenly, out of nowhere, shoots up because of COVID. Last question for you. I'm a vociferous reader. I also, listen to every podcast that is out there. What do you read? What do you love listening to? And for all of us who want to build great brands and build brands better, what should be on our bookshelf? Who should we be following? I see a Starbucks book back there.
Actually, I don't read too much. So this is not even a secret. I read either just pulp.
Okay.
So to me, to de-stress, and most on flights, which also now has taken over by all these Netflix and Prime and all that. But to me, some of the autobiographies are really the exciting one. I am a big fan of Howard Schultz, so Starbucks is really
Onward. What a great book.
In fact, you should read this one if you saw it on my shelf. It's called How Starbucks Saved My Life.
Okay.
Beautiful book, yeah. But what I'm reading right now is probably very interesting, and it was recommended to me by one of our CEOs, and I've just started. It's called Building $1 Billion Brands. Okay. And it's about the D2C brands and how they built out. It's fascinating. So that may be an interesting one to, especially for digital entrepreneurs. Sounds like a good reference.
Got it. Building billion-dollar brands.
Yeah, I think that's, I've forgotten the exact name. But yeah, it's on Kindle, so easy to find.
We'll check it out. Thank you so much. Your passion for your companies is amazing. It's so nice to hear you speak with your companies the way your founders speak about their companies, because I've had a chance to interact with a lot of them. This has been amazing. I think, I think my favorite takeaway from our conversation today is it's super important for founders to be very clear about what they want to build for, right? You want a 50 crore outcome, 100 crore outcome, 1,000 crore outcome, no problem. But figure out what outcome you're building for and then work towards it. Any last piece of advice, any advice, or just, anything interesting that you want to share with all of us?
Actually, a contrarian advice. I think depending on VCs as the only source of funding is probably not the way to go. I think VCs are important, and certainly, we are in the business, so I'm not deselling ourselves. But the good news is that today, because of this, like I called it, great demand, great consumer, and great infrastructure, you can actually build brands more efficiently, less capital, and faster time frames. So therefore, one strong advice is, start small, start with the basic foundations, and build it over time and build a strong brand. I think funding follows, because I find, obviously we see hundreds of businesses every month. And sometimes, you wish that people would just take the bull by the horn and, kind of take it out to the next level. And second is that there are more and more sources of alternate financing which are starting to emerge. And a lot of our companies, we have been able to leverage, from banks to NBFCs to all kinds of family offices. Because in the consumer business, there are several places where you can finance through debt, whether it's inventory, working capital, and a lot of the government now focus is going to be on that. You must have heard he has announced 100 crore, debt fund. So I would say that's my, as I said, contrarian thought. I would love for thousands of new brands to get built, but thousands of brands are not going to get funded by VCs. So we need the entrepreneurs to take the call and move on.
Yeah, and have a long-term view on how they think of their brand.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This was incredible. Thank you so much. We hope you stay safe. To everyone else who joined us, thanks a lot for joining us. Our next guest is actually going to be from Kanwal's portfolio. So we have Rohan from Epigamia, who will be talking to us on the 21st of May. So all of you guys don't miss signing up for that. Sorry, like Kanwal said, like any good founder, we're being very cheap. So we're not subscribing to Zoom. We have a 100% cap. You either get in or you stay out. So make sure you sign up in time so you can attend these sessions. But thank you so much. This was incredible.
Thank you, guys. Lovely to be with you guys. Thank you.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.